This is Camp Mystic, an all-girls Christian summer camp located along the banks of the Guadalupe River in the Texas Hill Country. 750 young girls and dozens of staff have just begun their summer term here. In just a few days, 25 campers, all aged 10 or under, 2 counselors, and the camp director will all be dead, washed away by raging floodwaters during a storm that would soon become the deadliest inland flooding event in the U.S. in nearly half a century. This is the story of those 27 girls, the over 100 other individuals across the region who died that day, and the numerous communities decimated by the floods. The irresponsibility, carelessness for human life, and neglect that led to their deaths, and the efforts by those responsible, at Camp Mystic and elsewhere, to cover up their wrongdoings, harass victims' families, and avoid responsibility in the months since. To tell it right, and to give justice to the stories of those who perished, we must start from the beginning. Camp Mystic was a Texas institution. It was the kind of place where someone's grandparents went, then their parents, then them, then their children. A tradition passed down through generations. Former First Lady Laura Bush worked as a counselor at the camp while she was in college, and Lady Bird Johnson attended various events there, ultimately sending her 2 daughters, Lucy and Linda, as campers. It was a place where the elites of Texas sent their daughters to grow, learn, and develop spiritually, through friendly competitions, activities, and weekly church services. For the girls, it was a little slice of heaven, where lifelong friendships were cultivated and where they were provided with the tools they needed to become successful young women. For the parents, it was a place where they could send their daughters for the summer without fearing for their safety. For decades, they put their blind faith into the camp's owners and staff, but there were always signs of the danger laying in plain sight. The Guadalupe River has always been known for its often sudden and violent floods. Part of a larger region within the Texas Hill Country known as Flash Flood Alley, it has been described as the most flash flood-prone region in the country. Oftentimes, the river was nearly completely dry, just a trickle, low enough for campers to walk across. But it had a tendency for destruction. On July 1st, 1932, a mere 6 years after the opening of Camp Mystic, it was inundated by floodwaters when the Guadalupe suddenly overflew its banks. Several of the camp's cabins were washed away, leaving dozens of girls to stand by and watch as their possessions were swept down the raging river. There were discussions about whether or not the camp should even reopen, but sure enough, a few months later they had begun to rebuild a little farther from the river's edge. The Guadalupe reared its ugly head again in August of 1978. In a series of floods that took the lives of 33 across the hill country, the river inundated Camp Mystic, reaching as far as the camp's dining hall. Campers awoke in the middle of the night to the view of floodwaters rapidly rising. With little time to spare, counselors evacuated them to higher ground. One girl later recalled watching cars and animals floating down the river from their elevated vantage point. News reports from the time state that the vehicles of 5 camp counselors were swept downstream by floodwaters. The camp was without food for several days, but by and large got lucky once again, with no fatalities or injuries. Less than 10 years later, in July 1987, floods struck the Guadalupe River yet again. 2 cabins were evacuated and staff spent the night observing the raging river, making sure it didn't rise higher. Once again, the campers at Camp Mystic avoided harm, but just a few miles down the river, 10 teenagers were killed when a bus evacuating them from a church camp near the city of Comfort was washed downstream. It was a brutal reminder of the river's power, and of the danger being so close to it posed. It was that year when Dick Eastland took ownership of the camp. Seeing the threat the river posed, Dick, who was a member of the Upper Guadalupe River Authority, the agency that manages the segment of the river that runs next to Camp Mystic, joined other local officials in an effort to install gauges along the river to better help emergency managers warn those along its banks of future floods. A couple of years later, their efforts proved successful, and the new gauge system was installed. In an interview with the Austin American-Statesman, Dick Eastland was quoted as saying, "I'm sure there will be other drownings. People don't heed warnings." In 1998, the company that maintained the state-of-the-art system, which wasn't even a decade old yet, abruptly closed its doors. The gauges soon stopped working due to a lack of maintenance, and in 1999 the River Authority elected to shut it down. They stated that the system was unreliable, with some of the system's stations not reporting information, citing a fear of false signals as a contributing factor in their decision. Over the subsequent years, Camp Mystic continued to expand. New cabins were constructed and the price of attendance rose, from $1,304 adjusted for inflation in 1996 to $6,154 in 2011. While profits grew, the camp did little to make its ever-expanding campus safer from flooding. In fact, quite the opposite. In 2011, FEMA included much of Camp Mystic in a special flood hazard area on its national flood insurance map. This meant that the camp was required to have flood insurance and had to deal with tighter regulations on any future construction projects within the hazard area. That designation was given to areas vulnerable to 100-year floods, or in other words, floods so severe that they have a 1% chance of happening in any given year. Seeing this map could have provided the Eastland family with an opportunity to relocate their most at-risk cabins to higher ground. But just 2 years later, FEMA removed 15 structures on the main campus of Camp Mystic from the special hazard area, following an appeal made by the camp's owners. 6 years later, in 2019, 15 more structures on the adjacent Cypress Lake campus were removed. Many analysts speculate that these appeals are made in an attempt to avoid the requirement to purchase flood insurance, to lower the camp's existing insurance premiums, or to allow them to renovate or add new structures within the at-risk area, without the stringent regulations required in FEMA flood hazard areas. In other words, after government officials told them that their cabins were in a hazard area at high risk of dangerous flooding, the Eastlands chose to cheat the system, getting the government to redefine the hazard area so they could save a few bucks and continue expanding. While Camp Mystic was able to remove the designation specifically meant to ensure the safety and protection of its campers, the danger posed by the river obviously never went away, and was clear to everyone who cared enough to look. If the river's extensive history of damaging flooding wasn't enough, flood maps released by First Street, a climate risk modeling company, showed the expected severity of a 100-year flood. While 12 buildings were still left within the special hazard area, floodwaters in such an event were expected to rise much higher, putting the entire camp, including many of the cabins for its youngest campers, at risk. It was this section of cabins here, the ones closest to the river's edge, known to campers as the Flats, where the youngest campers slept. Despite their position on the hazardous floodplain, nothing was done to protect them from the river's floodwaters. While little was done to protect the camp itself, to Dick Eastland's credit, he and others on the Guadalupe River Authority continued to push for a new warning system to better alert people along the riverbanks of future floods. These plans called not only for new gauges, but a siren system as well, to provide direct and clear warning to everyone along the Guadalupe. However, their efforts were thwarted by a lack of funding and opposition from some local residents and politicians. Grant applications submitted by the River Authority were reportedly denied by the state of Texas in 2016 and 2017. A year later, in 2018, posts on the official Camp Mystic Instagram account show flooding in the area, with the caption, "A little flooding on the bridge today. Rain days at camp are the best." Another attempt at getting a grant a few years later was stalled after it was discovered the grant they were pursuing would only cover 5% of the cost. While efforts on the local level were repeatedly failing to make progress, as recently as early 2025, efforts were being made on the state level to address some of the problems along the Guadalupe River. House Bill 13 aimed to create a government council that was to oversee the creation of a statewide emergency response plan, and the distribution of grants like those requested years before by the Guadalupe River Authority. Specifically called for in the bill was the addition of new outdoor warning sirens along at-risk rivers. Flooding was just a part of what the bill addressed, as it aimed to find solutions to a greater problem related to the state's preparedness for all sorts of natural disasters, an issue that was brought to the forefront following Texas government officials' questionable response to the Smokehouse Creek fire in 2024, the largest fire in state history, which torched over 1 million acres in the Texas Panhandle. While the bill managed to pass the Texas House of Representatives, there were signs of dissent within some sections of the state legislature. Among those holding such beliefs was Wes Friedel, the state representative for the 53rd House District, which included much of Kerr County, where Camp Mystic was located. Verdell voted against the bill, initially saying that too much funding was attached. The bill went on to pass through the House but was rejected by the Senate in April of 2025. It was 2 months later when campers returned to the shores of the Guadalupe River. Over 700 girls from around the state were in attendance at Camp Mystic. They thought they were the lucky ones. Hundreds more had been left on a wait list. The girls were treated to days of activities and games under the late June sun. But a week into the session, danger loomed on the horizon. What would follow was a nightmare, a flood worse than the region had ever seen before. Those in power would later state that they weren't given proper warning, that nobody could have seen it coming. And while it's true that no one predicted the flooding would be as historic as it was, their statements don't tell the full story. In late June, a ridge of high pressure had stalled itself over the eastern portions of the United States. While the high pressure brought record heat to much of the eastern seaboard, it steered tropical moisture into Texas, setting up the conditions necessary for heavy rain-producing storms. On June 29th, Tropical Storm Barry made landfall 275 miles south of the US-Mexico border. Barry brought with it plentiful tropical moisture, which soon pushed inland, colliding with the already moist air in place over the Lone Star State. Combined with additional contributions from Hurricane Flossie in the eastern Pacific, and a developing tropical wave over Central America, by July 2nd, National Weather Service measurements indicated an abnormally moist atmospheric environment for July. Later that day, radar observations revealed the development of a mesoscale convective vortex in the Mexican state of Chihuahua, a small circulation that acts as a focal point for thunderstorm development. MCVs can often be erratic. Forecasters have noted that they can be particularly hard to predict and model properly, as was the case on July 2nd as the system crossed the Rio Grande River and made its way into the Big Bend region of Texas. Moving slowly, it caused flooding near Big Bend National Park, and the writing was on the wall for continued flooding as it progressed east. Accordingly, on the afternoon of July 3rd, the National Weather Service office in Austin, San Antonio issued a flood watch for much of the Texas Hill Country, including Kerr County and much of the Guadalupe River. The watch called for 1 to 3 inches of rain, with isolated areas of 5 to 7 inches possible. As the evening progressed, storms soon moved into the region, as the upper atmosphere was inundated with historic levels of moisture, reaching the surface via a series of slow-moving, training thunderstorms. By 7 p.m., the Weather Prediction Center had released a mesoscale precipitation discussion, noting that concerning trends for backbuilding and training thunderstorms over the Texas Hill Country were present. Such storms could produce upwards of 3 inches per hour max rainfall rates. At Camp Mystic, campers were just finishing dinner. They played games, danced, and socialized, before eventually returning to their cabins. At 10, the girls were put to bed and the lights were turned out. The low hum of chatter was replaced by the pitter-patter of rain. But by midnight, that pitter-patter had become a cacophony. Sheets of rain attacked the walls and windows as thunder shook the ground. Many of the girls were woken up. Counselors tried their best to calm the girls down and get them back to sleep, but there would be little rest that night. While the cabins were descending into chaos, the river was rising. At 1:14 a.m. on the 4th of July, the National Weather Service issued a flash flood warning for much of Kerr County, calling for life-threatening flash flooding. Phone data reveals that at the time, camp owner Dick Eastland was awake and actively monitoring the storm. 30 minutes later, he radioed his son Edward, who helped run the camp. According to an interview Edward Eastland gave to the New York Times, his father told him that they'd gotten about 2 inches of rain within the past hour, and that they needed to move the canoes away from the waterfront. They promptly did so, moving them to a hillside adjacent to the flats, where they assumed they'd be safe from the rising floodwaters. Soon, camp staff gathered together inside the office, where they continued to monitor the situation. Joining the Eastlands there was camp night watchman Glenn Yankee. At 2:14 a.m., an hour after the flash flood warning calling for life-threatening flooding had been issued by the National Weather Service, Mr. Yankee recorded this video of the raging waters at the nearby Bubblegum Creek, a small tributary of the Guadalupe that usually ran dry. 7 minutes later, Dick Eastland texted his wife, "Bubblegum Creek is bad. Look at the radar." Still, the Eastlands seemed to expect things to get better. His wife responded by saying it looked like storms would be over shortly. But the waters were still rising, and it was at roughly the same time when counselors at Bug House, a cabin housing 12-year-olds closest to the river, noticed water seeping in through the doors. Quickly, they ran to the camp office where they alerted the Eastlands. The Eastlands drove the two counselors back and tried to reassure them, later recalling that at that point it was just a normal flood. But shortly before 3 a.m., Edward received a call from the gatehouse at the entrance to the camp. A staff member staying there radioed in saying that there was water coming into her cabin. She told Edward that she couldn't get the door open, before her voice was replaced by what Edward would later describe as very strange noises. She was unreachable after that. It was around that time when the cabin was swept down the river by the raging waters. The staff member inside survived by clinging onto a tree. Shortly after that, Dick Eastland ordered the evacuation of Bug House. The waters were getting too high. By this point, waters had already enveloped much of the camp dining hall and were just reaching the cabins on the flats. The campers in Bug House were loaded into the vehicles of Dick Eastland, Edward Eastland, and Mr. Yankee, who drove them on a pathway that cut directly through the flats. While they were taken to higher ground, the campers in Bubble Inn, Twins, Gigglebox, Nut House, and Jumble House stayed put. It was what the camp safety plan called for during a flood. These sheets were posted on the walls of the cabins. All they provided was a short paragraph of instructions. All campers were to stay in their cabins. Instructions will be provided over the PA system. All cabins are constructed on high, safe ground. Never once did the Eastlands or other staff come around to tell them to evacuate. Never once did anyone at the camp come over the PA system set up all around the entire campus to instruct them to reach higher ground. So, the counselors did what they were taught to do, all while trying to calm cabins full of panicked girls as the waters rose higher. The counselors at Nut House watched as Bug House was evacuated. They could see out their windows as the waters quickly creeped closer. Eventually, they decided to take matters into their own hands, evacuating campers up a nearby hill. Shortly afterwards, the counselors at Jumble House ventured outside to ask Edward Eastland for permission to take their campers to higher ground as well. He told them yes, a luxury he never gave to any of the other nearby cabins. This photo was taken at 3:26. It shows campers from Jumble House evacuating to the rec hall, the water shin high. This video, taken by a staffer from the second floor of the camp office, was taken at roughly the same time. The girls can be seen evacuating in the background as rapids flow mere feet away, including right through Twins' cabin. Twins' cabin, along with the neighboring Bubble Inn and Wiggle Inn, housed the youngest age bracket staying at the camp. The campers in these cabins were 8 to 9 years old. They hadn't been told to leave, but by this point it was already too late. The water was too high for those girls to walk through, and it was still rising. Realizing this, Dick and Edward Eastland would rush to Bubble Inn and Twins' cabin respectively, while Mr. Yankee would head to Wiggle Inn. Almost as soon as he got there, Mr. Yankee would find himself forced to stand atop a bunk bed. The campers and counselors were soon forced to float on inflatable mattresses. The bunks thrashed against the walls as the rapids brought in large clumps of stinging fire ants. The girls held hands. One of the counselors led the group in prayer. Mr. Yankee tried to joke with them to lighten the mood, but beneath that facade, the 57-year-old retired police officer was terrified. Camp Mystic wasn't the only camp being affected by the floods, though. It was around the same time waters were inundating the flats that this video, showing a cabin full of counselors floating down the Guadalupe, was captured a few miles to the north at Camp La Junta, an all-boys camp. Everyone in the cabin, as well as all 400 boys in attendance, would survive. Meanwhile, staff members in the camp office called into 911. Panicked and helpless as the camp was swallowed around them, they tried their best to call for help.
I'm calling for Camp Mystic. The water is almost in our home. What
Are you in Hunt, Texas?
Yes, we are
Okay.
in Han, Texas, Camp
Okay.
Mystic.
Okay, what I will tell you right now is I'm going to transfer you to the sheriff's office so they can get your address. What I can tell you right now is we have everybody head that direction, including water rescues, to try and get everybody across the city out and safe, okay?
There's 4 teenagers, 4 20-year-olds actually.
Okay, and they're not currently at the house anymore?
No,
Or
they
they-
got washed away.
Okay, we do have boats that are headed out there or are out there already working on getting everybody, so they are working on getting everybody who's in the water.
We live about a mile down the road from Camp Mystic, and we've already got 2 little girls who have come down the river, and we've gotten to them, but I'm not sure how many else are out there.
Kerr County 911, what is the location of your emergency? Kerr County 911, can you hear me? Kerr County 911, is anyone there?
I'm stuck in this room. I can't get out. There's water. There's door. The window's broken, and there's water coming in through it. The building's falling apart. Oh my god. Oh my gosh.
And you're unable to get out?
Oh, the water's so high. Oh no. Oh no. The windows, it's gonna come in all at once. The windows are rattling.
Yes, ma'am. I've got everybody heading your direction, but I have other 911 calls I have got to take that way.
My house is flooding. I can't go anywhere. My house is moving. We're going to die.
We're going to do everything we can to avoid that, okay?
I have an infant. She can't hold her breath.
Okay, I'm going to have to disconnect. We have other 911 calls.
Don't, please, baby, please don't. Please, I'm begging you. Please have somebody to talk to me. I'm scared.
Kerr County 911, what is the location of your emergency?
We're at Casa Bonita cabins, and our kids we are flooded in the house.
Okay, we've got everybody headed that direction to do it. We've got tons of calls on flooding and houses and everything else. We have all the deputies we can and fire rescue headed that direction. The best thing I can tell you right now is to get as best you can to higher ground. But I'm going to go ahead and transfer you to the sheriff's office so they're aware, okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, right, they're on their way. The fire department is on their way.
Hey, yes, the tree that I'm in is starting to lean and it's going to fall. Is there a helicopter close? I've probably got maybe 5 minutes left and I'm dead.
At Bubble Inn, Dick Eastland parked his Tahoe in front of the cabin. When he stepped out, he found the water to be 2 or 3 feet high. He rushed inside, just as Edward did the same at the twins' cabin. When Edward arrived, he found the 2 counselors screaming for help on the porch. Around this time, another video was taken from the camp office. Comparing it to the original, it seems as if the water had managed to rise 5 feet in the span of 24 minutes. When Edward made his way into the twins' cabin, which housed nearly 24 girls, he found the campers huddled together in the corner atop 2 bunks. Water was pouring in through the windows at this point, and the girls were screaming loudly. Soon the counselors started yelling too. The water was chest high. At around 3:50, Edward radioed his dad. Dick was struggling in the rapids that had enveloped Bubble Inn. He'd been attempting to move the girls out of the cabin and into his Tahoe, planning on bringing them to higher ground. Over the radio, Edward was able to hear him say, "I need help. I can't move." But Edward told him he couldn't help. After all, he was helping evacuate Twins' cabin. A few seconds later, Dick Eastland's voice could no longer be heard over the radio. The water had picked up his vehicle and swept it down the river. A data report from his vehicle indicated a crash at roughly 3:51, when the vehicle was slammed into a tall cypress along the riverbank. Dick Eastland was later found dead in his vehicle. All 15 campers and counselors within the Bubble Inn were killed. 3 of them were found alongside Dick in his vehicle. It's unclear if the rest had been in the Tahoe too, or if they had been washed away while trying to get to it. Meanwhile, in the twins' cabin, things were getting worse. The water was at Edward Eastland's shoulders when a counselor shouted that girls were being swept out of the door. 3 of them were swept right past Edward. The third was washed right past him and into the darkness. Soon enough, the water was above his head. He recalled another girl being swept away. She wrapped her arms around his neck, clinging on for her life. Suddenly, Edward Eastland lost his footing. The rapids swept him out the door and down the river. Eventually, he was swept into the canopy of a large tree just below Bughouse, where he had first helped evacuate campers earlier that night. 8 campers and 3 counselors were able to survive by clinging on to those very same branches. Another counselor was able to survive in a tree further down the road. 1 camper was found alive a little further down from her, and 3 more campers miraculously survived by hanging onto trees downriver. 11 campers from the twins' cabin drowned. An additional camper from Jumble House, who had evacuated moments before the floodwaters overcame the structure, was swept away and killed after she attempted to return to the cabin for her blanket. Back at Wiggle Inn, Mr. Yankee rode out the flood atop the bunks with the girls for hours. It seemed like it would never end. Eventually, the first rays of morning light began to flutter in through the submerged windows. Slowly, the waters receded. Somehow, they had all survived the storm. These photos were taken after the flood in Bughouse. Water here reached nearly 9 feet high. A concrete section of one of the cabin walls was pushed in by the ferocious floodwaters, no match for the rapids. In the twins' cabin, water nearly reached the ceiling. The rapids here reached over 7 feet deep, nearly double the height of the little girls who were sleeping there. At Bubble Inn, a similar story. The waters here crested at over 6 feet. The remaining campers who'd evacuated to the rec hall took shelter on the 2nd floor balcony. They were helpless as the water filled the 1st floor and as the camp was further inundated. But miraculously, they too managed to survive. The waters stopped rising as the sun came over the horizon. But the camp they had known was gone, and those little girls would never be the same. As the waters receded, helicopters were flown in to evacuate campers. Anxious parents waited nearby to see if their child would run out. When the roads were cleared, some additional campers were bussed away, left to navigate through the devastation.
I'll shout it from the mountaintops. Praise God! I want my world to know the Lord of love has come to me. I want to pass it on. I'll shout it from the mountaintops. Praise God! I want my world to know the Lord of love has come to me. I want to pass it on. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Oh my God.
It wasn't long before stories began to pour out from those who survived the floods. Among them was Ainsley Bashara, a 19-year-old counselor who, along with 2 other counselors, managed to successfully evacuate 16 young campers from the Gigglebox cabin in the flats.
And my co-counselors start passing them through the window to me, and we had another staff member there as well, and we would take like 3 or 4 of them at a time.
You're carrying them up the hill on higher ground.
The Lord gave me supernatural abilities this night because I was carrying 3 or 4 of them. So the original thought was to go to Rec Hall, but we realized we couldn't have gotten across that field to get them all there safely. So there's almost this pavilion slightly uphill. It's called Cricket Corner. And we were like, okay, that's where we're gonna go. So we would carry them and we'd kind of run up the hill, and it wasn't super far, like maybe 30 yards. And And then when it was to my ankles, I'd let them all go and then tell them where to run, and they'd all run over there, and then I'd go back and just take a group after a group after a group. You're just kind of hearing the most horrific things, and there's just panic kind of over the entire camp. No one is, in our head, it's also an adrenaline thing. Yeah. You don't know that you're even in a flood. Like, the water is just rising. There's debris everywhere. You're just being like poured on. There's still lightning, and little girls are afraid of lightning, so afraid. So they're screaming and just terrified. Again, you're just hearing everybody else in full panic. We could see the cabin that was directly in front of us. They weren't able to all get out of their cabin. So
you could see that.
And we could see, I mean, you can't see them, but you can hear them. You can see flashlights in there. Like, you can only imagine like what's going on in there, which is almost like the scarier part. And the worst is you can't help, like you're stuck. You're stuck in, there's rapids in between us and the cabin.
So you just hear people yelling inside of a cabin and you feel helpless.
Yes. I mean, you're still not even processing everything. You're not grasping the whole idea of what is really going on. You're just kind of counting your 16 and then making sure that you have everyone, and then your kind of safety is your next thing. The water is still rising. We're still like having to hike up. The girls were still freaking out and panicked. So the best thing that I like kind of thought to do was tell them like bow their heads. And so they'd be like crying, and then and just like be quiet, and they'd bow their heads and they'd close their hands. And then I would just like yell a prayer over them. And we prayed, so I prayed over these girls so many times that they started coming up to me and being like, can we pray about my stuffed animal in the cabin? Yes, honey, let's pray about it. What's its name again? I forgot. And we would pray about her stuffed animal, or can we pray about my sister? Yeah. We'll pray about your sister. Can we pray about the cabin that we can see in front of us? Yes, we're gonna pray about them. Can we pray
Holly Kate Hurley was a counselor and lifeguard who was at the Cypress Lake campus during the floods. She detailed her experience in the aftermath of the disaster.
I think it was about 7:45 in the morning. One of the people from the office, she brings us this breakfast and talks to us, and she's like, hey, the girls from Guad who were on the flats, they're in James Hall, which is our dining hall, and they're soaking wet. They only have their clothes on their back. They had to flee in the middle of the night. Get your clothes, we're gonna bring them over. And that's when it hit me like, oh my God, like these girls just fought for their lives last night. There's like a little group of cabins that are all next to each other. The counselors are brought out, we're in a circle, 3 people from the office, and Katie Eastland, who's one of the people that runs the camp. They look at us and they say, the flood last night was a lot worse than we thought, that there were people unaccounted for, that half of twins 1 and 2 was missing, all of Gigglebox was missing, and Edward and Dick Eastland were missing. I literally fell to the ground and I started sobbing.
Because that's when you realized lives had been lost?
Mm-hmm. Like, I have had those campers, those tiny campers, and I'm a lifeguard. I've seen them swim before. And they can barely tread water. And knowing what the river looked like to my right, I was like, there's no way. And so I was like dry heaving. I was like, I lost it. I went over to the nurses, and literally one of the nurses, she looked me in the eye, she goes, you have to pull it together. You have to be strong because there are girls in there that need you. I wiped away my tears. I stood up. Before I made it back to my cabin, a man I've never seen before ran to the dam, started yelling at us, his daughter's name. Where's my daughter? We're like, we have her, she's accounted for. Where's my niece? What cabin is she in? Bubble in.
Over the coming days, little bodies began to wash up all along the shores of the Guadalupe River. While it would take weeks for some of them to be found, all 27 of the campers and counselors killed in the flooding would eventually be recovered, except for one. The body of 8-year-old Seal Stewart has never been recovered. She was in the twins' cabin.
We had no reason to believe that this was going to be anything like what's happened here. None whatsoever.
We could get storms that develop high rainfall rates and they sit or train over the same area. So notice at 10 to 11 o'clock, we do have some showers and storms in and around the I-35 corridor. Notice how they sort of sit, Bandera, Medina County, Kerr, near Bexar County. And this is at 1 in the morning. And then notice there's just no movement here.
You can go back and look at your own forecast, and the amount of rain that fell in this specific location was never in any of those forecasts.
The crux of the forecast is going to be what happens with the remnant low pressure system after it's done moving northwestward along the Rio Grande. It's going to try to make a turn towards the east and northeast thereafter. If this happens, we have a storm system essentially right on top of us with all this tropical fuel in place. Not only are we looking at a few rounds of heavy rain and storms on Thursday, but some of that could linger into Thursday night, Friday morning.
With the rainfall percentages, even the National Weather Service had looked at, and don't quote me on the numbers, but it's anywhere between 1 to 7, 7 inches. We got significantly over that.
We know we get rains. We know the river rises. But nobody saw this coming.
Immediately after the floods, the deflection began. Officials acted as if the floods came by surprise, as if they had received next to no warning. But that simply isn't the truth. As we said earlier, a flood watch had been issued on the afternoon of July 3rd. A flood warning calling for life-threatening flooding was in effect when the waters first began threatening structures at Camp Mystic. Yet, no preparations were made. Residents weren't informed by local officials of the risk present. No evacuations anywhere along the river were ordered. First responders were caught off guard. The 911 call center was soon overwhelmed by calls, and police, firefighters, and EMS were spread thin. With the extent of the flooding, it's likely that this would have happened no matter what, but if they had simply paid attention to the watches and warnings, they could have been more prepared to handle what was coming, and lives could have been saved. It was not unforeseen. It was not unpredictable. Something could have been done. While it is true that the rain that fell was more than had been predicted, the warnings, which provided instructions on how to prepare and respond, were still there. While local officials had the ability to respond to these warnings, many residents who resided along the river did not. Many people who lived in the rural areas around Camp Mystic lacked cell service and were unable to receive alerts. If a siren system existed along the river, like the Guadalupe River Authority had been proposing for decades, it's possible residents would have received sufficient warning. In fact, one small section of the river did have its own system. The City of Comfort, the site of significant flooding in 1987 that swept away a bus carrying evacuees from a summer camp, killing 10 teenagers, had a siren system that was set to automatically go off when a flash flood emergency was issued. Local officials manually set it off before then, though, when they noticed the rising floodwaters. Everyone in the City of Comfort survived. As locals began to pick up the debris, heavy scrutiny began to be placed upon officials at Camp Mystic and in local government. Among those from the latter group who received the most pushback was State Representative Wes Verdell. As you may recall, Verdell voted against House Bill 13 in early 2025, which aimed to create a government council that was to oversee the creation of a statewide emergency response plan, and the distribution of grants like those requested years before by the Guadalupe River Authority. At the time, he'd claimed that the bill requested too many funds, but after touring the damage along the shores of the Guadalupe, Verdell stated that if the bill was up again then, he'd reconsider his vote. However, just a few weeks later, when interviewed by CBS's Austin affiliate, he changed his stance yet again.
You were quoted in the Texas Tribune the week that you were here, saying you may have reconsidered your vote on that bill at the time. Is that still true?
I'll give you the scenario on that. I was actually right over here driving down the road. They called and asked if I would do an interview with them. I said, yeah, no problem.
While he said he may reconsider his vote at the time, he's since taken that answer back.
So I called my team and I said, hey, look this bill up, review it, and tell me why we voted against it. And they called me back and they said, hey, you voted against it because it didn't have transparency. It was creating a council to oversee the grants for this, all this kind of stuff. And it had specifically had in there no transparency for the council, which is a really bad idea.
Just 17 other House members joined Virdell in voting no.
Not everyone in the State House had the same attitude as Virdell, though. For State Representative Drew Darby, the disaster at Camp Mystic and the flooding along the Guadalupe hit particularly close to home.
My son had picked up his 2 daughters from Camp Mystic the week before. We had friends and neighbors there in San Angelo that were there camping. Some of our great friends and their great friends had children actually in camps there. Right then, I called the speaker and I said, I want to be a part of trying to find solutions to these issues facing our camps here in Texas.
Governor Greg Abbott soon ordered a special session in the State House, which aimed to address and reveal the perceived failures that had led to the widespread loss of life across the Hill Country. A special committee was formed made up of politicians from around the state, including Representatives Virdell and Darby. They had sat through hours of testimony from local and state officials, as well as from the parents of the girls lost at Camp Mystic. The parents of the 25 campers and 2 counselors lost in the floods banded together to form a unified front. Together, they spoke of the failures of camp leaders to properly plan for and respond to the disaster, emotions running high.
For 14 years, I spent my summers on the magical banks of the Guadalupe River at Camp Mystic. I met my best friends there, learned how to be a good sport, and grow spiritually. I couldn't wait to have a daughter so she could go to Mystic and experience what I did. Even though it wasn't technically written in our wedding vows, I made Doug promise if we had a daughter, she would go to Camp Mystic. 9 years ago this week, we found out we were having Hadley. Before I get any further, let me tell you a little about Hadley. Hadley is the middle sister of Harper, who is 10 and was also at camp and rescued by the grace of God, and Hunter May, who is 6. She was the glue. Hadley was the best, happiest baby from the start. And as she grew, her love and her smile grew too. To know her was to love her because she loved everyone. She loved to give hugs, sometimes of the sneak attack variety, kisses and pets. Hadley was the nicest, sweetest, happiest person, always exuding joy. She always wanted to help her friends, whether it was teaching them how to tie their shoes or become a better gymnast. Hadley was a go-getter, and she knew what she wanted, and she worked her hardest to make it happen. She was so smart and insightful and wanted to be the best, most well-rounded person she could be. I was lucky enough to chaperone the Mystic Dallas bus to camp on June 29th. As I went to tell Hadley and Harper goodbye, I saw Hadley running across the field to see Harper in her cabin. They had been apart for 5 minutes at the most. Once I convinced them to come outside and take one last selfie and tell me goodbye, Hadley jumped down from the porch and started cartwheeling her way to her cabin. She heard me laughing, stopped, turned around, threw her hands in the air, and screamed, "I love this place." Unfortunately, 5 days after starting, the camp of my dreams turned into a living nightmare I cannot wake up from. Hadley, Harper, and all the campers should have woken up on July 4th and celebrated the holiday with their new friends. Instead, Hadley was pulled out of a window of her twins' 2 cabin after it had filled with water. Less than 10 feet away were stairs to an upstairs apartment. That higher ground could have saved her life and the 5 girls in her cabin that also passed away. Hadley wasn't the strongest swimmer, not that it mattered in those waters, but she was strong, so strong. I thought if she could hold on to something, she would be okay. Instead, she and 2 other little girls were knocked out of a tree and died. In total, 5 of the 12 girls from her cabin also died. Our precious, hilarious, kind, caring, silly, loving little girl who always wanted to help others died because there was no plan. because there was no backup system or sirens, because the sweet 18 and 19-year-old counselors did not have the training they needed. Instead, they were told to stay in place, a rule that proved to be fatal. I personally asked if there were children in the morgue whose parents hadn't been notified. I had originally heard this from the media. The answer was yes. There were 5 whose parents were in the process of being notified and 1 unidentified. It turns out that 1 was our sweet daughter, Hadley Rebecca. The only way the Rangers knew for sure it was her was after I told them she had had alternating green and yellow nail polish on her fingernails. The child laying in a makeshift morgue could not have looked more different than our beautiful girl. It is a sight I can't get out of my head. It haunts me day and night and is all I think about. I think about how much she suffered and how scared she had to have been in that dark, cold water. It kills me that I couldn't have helped her. Before Hadley left for camp, she was worried about being away from me for a month. You see, she may have her dad's personality, but she was my mini-me and my best friend. I promised her she would be safe and okay. I told her camp was the safest place she could be, and she would make new friends and learn new things. I lied to her. She not only wasn't safe, she died. We sat around for 16 hours praying, hoping, pacing, getting prank phone calls and texts from people saying they had her. For her only to be found down the road, alone. The overwhelming lack of prevention, detection, training, and response in this situation is mind-boggling, and is what we are asking SB1 to address. This is not the first flood, and it certainly won't be the last.
Chloe was 18 when she was killed. This is a grown woman. She is survived by her brother Jack, 15, who started his sophomore year today at the Kincaid School in Houston, Texas. She was one of the counselors, along with Catherine Ferruzzo, in the Bubble Inn cabin where all lives were lost. As others have testified, we tried our best to not think about the horror, the terror, and the fear that happened in that cabin that night. 14 girls scrambling for their lives because they did what they were told to do. But as we fast forward, it does turn out that Chloe was not just my hero, but she was an actual hero. Chloe and Catherine both died as heroes trying to save all those sweet little girls. Chloe was the perfect balance that I could ask for. She was fun, she was spontaneous, she was a troublemaker, she made all of her friends laugh, but she was also smart and studious and driven. And because of this, I called her the Machine. She was also a rule follower. As her father, this is what I taught her. I taught her manners. I taught her respect. I taught her to obey orders and authority. She did what I told her. She followed directions, the authorities. And that is what killed her.
Hi, I'm Lacey Virginia Ela Collis, and I live on a ranch outside of Belleville, Texas, where I grew up. In a house that was the first place I carried Virginia into, and the last place I carried her out of. I support SB1, and I would like to tell you why this bill is so important to me. My daughter Virginia, our first child, named for me and for my grandmother, died sometime after the rain and river flooding that happened in the early morning hours of July 4th. We don't know when she died. We don't know how. We really don't know anything. We may never know. All we do know is our daughter was at camp. She was not protected. She was not safe because she died along with 26 other girls. I was not there to protect her. But I do hope that this legislation can help protect other daughters and sons of Texas. other big sisters, little sisters, brothers, other people's babies, their grandchildren, nieces, nephews, cousins, all of the sweet, innocent best friends of those little girls, my godchildren, and my friends' godchildren. Hopefully no other parent will ever experience the excruciating and unimaginable pain and torture I am trapped in, or the never-ending nightmare that is my life now. And I have to fight not to drown in it every second of every day. I'm her mother. I carried her in my body. I need for her voice to still be heard. This needs to become law, exactly because she lost the chance to grow up and testify for these things today. 27 girls will never get to speak in this building, never have the time on earth to graduate college, to marry the love of their life, to have a baby, or to realize their dreams. I don't want any more children to die at a Texas youth camp.
The two of us recently visited my 106-year-old grandmother in June because I feared the opposite would occur. And Virginia, in her luggage, created a checklist of the things so that she could prepare. Things from 2 goggles, 2 shorts, and many other things. We prepared. We made sure she'd have familiar faces on the first day at camp. Took a lot of work and time because we live in a rural town. As we best could, we prepared her to have the time of her life, to make friends and have her own experiences without us. We wanted to give her the gift to grow outside of our control, but in safety. Of the 3 girls she met prior to camp, only 1 survived. I support Senate Bill 1 because all the time and preparation we gave to our daughter, at a minimum, that same care needs to be required by law for the children at all Texas camps. We thought she would be safe there. Instead, she died.
The testimonies revealed an obvious truth. That years of complacency and brazen failures from those responsible for keeping campers and those residing in the hill country safe were responsible for the widespread loss of life. It was through these hearings that new legislation aiming at addressing camp safety were introduced. These bills look to require camps to submit emergency management plans to the state, enhance training for staff members, and ban cabins in floodplains. Representative Drew Darby was the author of the bill. On the day his bill was passed, he spoke in front of the chamber. With the parents of the Heavens 27 in attendance, he read out the names of the girls lost at Camp Mystic.
Members, this bill is for Heavens 27. In closing, I want to read their names aloud. Some of their families are in the gallery. And parents, if you'll stand when I read your daughter's name. Mary Grace Baker. Anna Margaret Bellows. Lila Bonner. Chloe Childress. Molly DeWitt. Lucy Dillon. Catherine Ferruzio. Elizabeth Getton. Hadley Hanna. Virginia Hollis. Janie Hunt. Mary Kate Jacoby. Lainey Landry. Hannah Lawrence. Rebecca Lawrence. Kellyanne Lattle, Sarah Marsh, Lenny McCowan, Blakely McCrory, Wynn Naylor, Eloise Peck, Abby Pohl, Margaret Sheedy, Rennie Sesmastra, Mary Stevens, Seal Stewart, Greta Taranza, thank you for your presence today. We are honored to have you. We share your grief. We support you in all ways. And with that, with the members gathered here today, in honor of your children and your families, I move passage.
136 ayes and 1 nay. House Bill 1 passes to engrossment.
But not everyone was on board with these reforms. Representative Wes Verdell felt the bill went too far and unfairly punished summer camps like Camp Mystic.
I think this bill was specifically drafted to target Camp Mystic to shut them down.
He criticized language in the bill requiring ladders and fiber optic internet access at camps as unnecessary financial obstacles. Verdell claims Darby knew the bills were flawed, but rushed them anyway.
And then Drew Darby, who was the author of the bill, who was carrying the bill basically for the lobby company. And he's been one of the people that have been pointing fingers quite a bit and trying to blame people.
I think the representative is off base when he says we were simply listening to one group over all the others, that we were trying to force Camp Mystic out of business. That is just not true. We're trying to protect campers, and if camp owners can't do what it takes to protect them, then maybe they shouldn't be in business. The idea that we're trying to answer to some sort of lobby group to act against other camps, I want to protect other camps. I want to protect the process.
We pressed Verdell on his no votes on the camp safety bills.
There are people who are going to look at this and say, well, if those bills were in place a year or two ago, they could have saved some lives. So what do you say to them?
It's a great question. I would have to say that I think that the rules are bad still to begin with, and we shouldn't implement a bunch of those. I don't like this bill. I mean, I wouldn't have implemented it 2 years ago. I don't think it would have saved lives, and I think it would have just put camps out of business. And what's often forgot about is how beneficial these camps are to a lot of people. For 100 years, people have been going to these camps, and if you go and look through those who have attended Camp Mystic or Camp La Junta and all that, they talk about how much it molded them as a good human being, right? Or to become a better human being and to be influential and help their community out. And then to say, well, now we're going to shut them down. I think that is a huge detriment to our society to shut something down for an unprecedented flood.
Meanwhile, the families of the Heavens 27 filed a lawsuit against Camp Mystic and the Eastland family, accusing them of gross negligence and reckless disregard for safety. The lawsuit claimed that Camp Mystic had failed to adopt proper evacuation plans, and that the Eastlands had ignored weather warnings, choosing to prioritize the preservation of canoes and other property over human life. The lawsuit went on to simply and clearly state, these young girls died because a for-profit camp put profit over safety. The lawsuit came shortly after the Eastlands announced that Camp Mystic was to reopen in the summer of 2026 at the Cypress Lake campus. The decision drew much criticism from the parents of the Heavens 27, but the lawyer for the Eastland family, Michael Watts, was quick to defend his clients. Watts, a prominent Austin-based attorney who made a career out of suing large organizations for negligence, owned a ranch near Camp Mystic, and offered to defend the Eastlands for free. Watts went back to the same deflections that officials had used in the immediate wake of the disaster. The flood was unprecedented, warnings were not adequate, and little could have been done.
We had flood levels that were never before seen. I know where the 1932 flood reached. I know where the 1978 flood reached, the 1987 flood reached. It wasn't even close. What happened on July the 4th of 2025 was an unprecedented 1,000-year flood in this area.
Watts says the cell phone warnings from the National Weather Service are sent out so often, many locals ignore them. And he says they don't differentiate between a moderate flood risk and a catastrophic downpour.
So we got the it's raining warning at 1:14 in the morning. The more severe emergency stuff didn't come until after the event was already over.
Grieving parents have questioned why girls and counselors were instructed to shelter in place and weren't evacuated to higher ground faster.
They did exactly what they were told to do that morning: stay in their cabins. Our daughters paid the ultimate price for their obedience to a plan that was destined to fail.
Watts claims ever since 10 campers were killed in 1987 when their bus was swept away by floodwaters while trying to evacuate, FEMA and other government agencies have advised people to shelter in place.
Get their birthday, names, addresses.
You can go onto all their websites. They've got a do not walk in this stuff, do not drive in this stuff, shelter in place. And that was the policy at Camp Mystic, and it was the appropriate policy.
But as stated before, while the flood was one of the most severe in the Guadalupe River's history, many of the cabins in the flats were in the FEMA-designated flood hazard area before the camp lobbied for the designation to be removed. They knew the risk was there, and they ignored it and attempted to hide it. Subsequent investigations revealed additional failures on the part of the Eastlands and other camp administrators. Camp counselors, who, mind you, were just teenagers, were never given proper disaster response training. The Eastlands themselves testified that they had no evacuation plan. Their evacuation efforts on the morning of July 4th were completely improvised. Counselors later told investigators that they feared making independent decisions due to the camp's strict culture of obedience. They had been taught to wait for instructions, to never act on your own. Counselors additionally had no radios or walkie-talkies that would have allowed communication with administrators, and no cell service on top of that, if they had phones at all, as they were banned in the cabins. Despite their location in the floodplain, cabins had no life jackets, and there were no ladders, tools, or equipment to aid in breaking through ceilings or windows in the case of total inundation. In other words, the counselors and campers were left completely clueless when the waters rose. They had been failed by Camp Mystic. Representing the family of Seal Stewart, who were one of the families suing the camp, was Brad Beckworth. In an interview with the Today Show, Beckworth and the Stewarts laid out the case clearly, and described their last moments before saying goodbye to Seal for the last time.
A flood is an act of God. It's Mother Nature causing that. It was the indecision, the bad actions, and the complacency of the Eastlands that killed 27 children.
This week, the family filed a lawsuit against Camp Mystic and the Eastland family, who have run the camp for 52 years. You wrote this: "There is no greater transfer of trust than that which occurs when a parent entrusts her child to the care of another." When you put Seal on the bus that day, you didn't think anything like this would ever happen.
I'm hugging her, telling her I love her repeatedly, and I tear up, and she says, this is the last thing Seal said to me: "Don't worry, Mommy, I'll be okay." Under no circumstance was she thinking about her safety, and nor was I. I was thinking of, you've never been away for this long. I hope you're not homesick. Not, don't worry, I'll be okay while I have to fend for my life.
All those little girls went to bed that night thinking they were fine,
And
that
safe.
they were going to wake up the next and safe. They trusted the Eastlands with their life. At 1:14 that morning, I think it's a really important thing to realize, the National Weather Service pushed out a flash flood warning. That 1:14 warning said, move to higher ground immediately. The Eastlands sat in their office for over an hour, and then they moved their canoes. They had let their horses out earlier, but they never warned a single child. Not Seal, not anyone.
The counselors were pleading for help from the Eastlands, repeatedly told, stay where you are. The reason why there were any survivors from Seal's cabin are because of these counselors. They were brave, they were strong. The counselors are breaking windows, trying to get girls through mattresses, underwater, getting them to safety. There are heroes at Camp Mystic, and none of them are named Eastlands.
And had they left, how far would they have had to walk to get to higher ground?
60 paces. As a 8-year-old, you could have made it in a brisk walk in 45 seconds to Rec Hall, 20 seconds to the hill, 10 seconds to the commissary. All they had to do was communicate.
Seal is the only camper whose body has not been recovered.
The only thing that really allows me to take a breath, or to have the energy to support my wife, or be with my youngest baby girl, are the promises that have been given and continue to be acted upon from Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick. They're not stopping. They've promised that they will not stop or let up until they bring Seal home.
Camp Mystic has announced that it will reopen for the summer of 2026 on their neighboring property.
We're not opposed to camp. We're not opposed to children going to camp. We're opposed to the Eastlands, the audacity of sending out deposit slips when our child, one of their campers who they profess to love in this community, is still missing.
As the case went to court, members of the Eastland family were called to testify, including Edward Eastland and his wife, Mary Liz.
I wish we never had camp that summer.
The first to take the stand, Director Edward Eastland, pressed on the camp's evacuation plan, which he said they had but couldn't produce.
I have searched all of our files that I can that were from my dad's office that are muddy, and I cannot find it.
Eastland acknowledged more campers could have survived if Mystic staff had acted sooner, but said there was no way to anticipate the speed and scale of the storm, adding he received no alerts on July 3rd before the flood.
Did you get a text from the National Weather Service?
No, sir.
Did you get an email from the National Weather Service?
No, sir.
From anyone else warning you that a flood was imminent on July the 3rd?
No, sir.
Eastland also describing the harrowing moments as the worst of the flood hit.
I held on to those girls, holding on to the door frame while there was another girl, the twins, one who jumped on my back. I don't know who it was, but they put their arms around my neck before we got washed out.
What happened to Seal?
I don't know.
Also taking the stand, Mary Liz Eastland, the camp's health officer and Edward's wife.
This requirement says you have to report a camper death within 24 hours of the occurrence. Did you do that?
Not to DSHS, no. I did not think of this requirement in the moments that were happening after the flood.
But this is something you should know. This is what governs you as a camp health officer, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you done this now?
No, ma'am, I have not.
She also testified she never called nursing staff at the camp's infirmary, who may have been able to help campers in the low-lying areas.
These were first-year campers. You had 34 more years of experience than Seal. She needed your help and you abandoned her, didn't you?
Yes.
Glenn Yankee was the last witness called to testify. He was pressed on the camp's lack of preparedness and refusal to order the evacuation of campers.
It was Dick's job to give it, wasn't it? He was the boss, right?
Yes, sir. He was the general that night.
He could have, as the general, gotten on that speaker at any point from 2:20 to 3 o'clock and said, girls, go to higher ground, right?
Possibly, yes, sir.
You know they would have followed the command of their general, right?
Yes, sir.
And he didn't give that order, did he?
No, sir.
And everyone that died because of that failure, right?
I would not call it a failure.
If we had taken one person who was not a counselor and gotten on a walkie-talkie or a loudspeaker at any point between 2:20 and 3:15 a.m. and said, we need to go to higher ground, go to specific cabins, and evacuate the counselors and campers. There were enough able-bodied people there to follow such an order. True?
Yes, sir.
That order was never given, correct?
Correct.
And 27 girls died because of that failure, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All the while, the Eastland family were continuing to stuff their pockets behind the scenes. Over 900 families had signed up their daughters to attend the planned session at Camp Mystic Cypress Lake that summer, despite the ongoing court case, all of whom had put down deposits. The judge declined to stop the camp from reopening, as many of the Heaven's 27 families had asked for, but she did order the indefinite closure and pause of any new construction on the Guadalupe campus. The Eastland family challenged the order and, after a few weeks, soon returned to the courtroom. But the judge upheld the order, only making small alterations but still maintaining that the Guadalupe River campus should remain closed. As the two parties and their attorneys left the courtroom, tension came to a head.
When I walked by, Mr. Wright looked at me and he said, "You're gonna burn in hell."
Accusations of personal insults inside the courtroom.
And then he told Mrs. Yarnell, "You're gonna burn in hell."
A moment picked up by courtroom cameras Tuesday night show the exchange. The spat, a sign of the tensions between the attorneys in the middle of a 3-day hearing about Camp Mystic.
In late April of 2026, members of the Eastland family and the parents of the Heavens 27 were called back in front of the Texas State House to question the camp's readiness to reopen in the summer of 2026. Listen to what Seal Stewart's mother had to say during her testimony.
You've heard plenty by now of the Eastland's evacuation plan. The Eastlands cavalierly insist, hey, we had a plan, you just didn't like it. Well, excuse my language, but damn right we didn't like it. Their so-called plan killed our daughters. 7 inches of rain, 12 inches of rain, 4 inches of rain, it does not matter. Shelter in place was a death sentence camouflaged as safety. Dick Eastland enforced a culture of obedience so powerful that their staff, including the directors of the camp and his children, were afraid to assist helpless children if it meant defying Dick's orders. The titled director demands diligence, not deference to dad. The Eastlands operated on obedience, faith, and complacency, and called it a plan. They rolled the dice each year and waited for the river to prove them wrong. And ultimately, while our children waited for rescue that would never come, the family obligated to protect them was improvising, sleeping, or saving themselves. The Eastland family markets its camp as a Christian ministry, a camp whose walls and songs and traditions all testify to the same thing, that the adults in charge are serving something higher than themselves. But the way the Eastlands have chosen to treat my family has been callous, absent, false, and demeaning. I expected that the first name on their lips every morning would be the name of the child not yet brought home. But I didn't hear Seal's name from them until I publicly demanded that they acknowledge her and that she was still missing back in September. I expected a ministry to minister to the families it had broken before it ministered to itself. My family was forced to file for an injunction to stop them from further destroying evidence so we can find out what happened to our daughters. We just want answers. We deserve that. It took 4 days of hard-fought testimony. It took a judicial order twice to command them to stop. And even then, they've appealed it. And at one point, one of Camp Mystic's own lawyers in front of me in open court approached my attorneys and told them they were going to burn in hell. The lawyers of a Christian ministry camp told my lawyers
that they're going to burn in hell for trying to help me find my daughter and learn the truth about what happened. And when questioned about it, the lawyer, Thomas Wright, said, "Oh, did I say that?" And he turned around and smirked. You can see it all on the video. He was proud. They believed that invocations of faith and ministry will shield them from consequences. But when a camp's response to the death of 27 children is to reopen, rebrand, and raise money, that is not a ministry. It is a business. You heard them loud and clear. Despite your pleas for them to take a step back and reflect, learn, and heal, Britt Eastland defiantly told you that, God willing, they'll be able to open this summer and make $3 to $4 million by doing so. And apparently one day I'll thank him for it. The Eastland family could transfer this entire camp to the arid desert of Big Bend with nary a drop of water in sight, and it would not make a difference. No camp will be safe for any child as long as the Eastlands are associated with it.
A few days after the hearings, Camp Mystic finally reversed their decision. They announced that they would no longer reopen in the summer of 2026, saying in a statement, "No administrative process or summer season should move forward while families continue to grieve, while investigations continue, and while so many Texans still carry the pain of last July's tragedy." Continuing on by stating that the camp made the decision to not reopen, rather than risk defending their rights under Texas law in a manner that may unintentionally affect further harm. But the pain for the victims' parents was not over yet. In May and June of 2026, as the one-year anniversary of the floods approached, the Eastlands and the families of the Heavens 27 returned to a courtroom yet again. The Eastlands claimed that a clause in a contract the families had signed before sending their daughters to the camp required that any potential lawsuits would be sent to arbitration, where the case would be private and details would be kept from the public's eyes. The hearings were emotional, as one would expect. Jorge Toranzo, the father of Greta Toranzo, teared up when listening to other parents testify. The last letter Seal Stewart wrote home to her parents was shown. And tensions were high between the sparring attorneys. Further accusations have risen, with the parents' attorneys accusing the defense of attempting to stall progress of the lawsuits, publicly harassing their clients, and lying to the judge, among a litany of other offenses. The attorneys have also stated that Will and Cece Stewart, the parents of Seal Stewart, have been attacked online by an attorney defending the camp, and by Camp Mystic supporters. At the time of making this video, no conclusion to this latest court battle has been reached. Another hearing on the matter is scheduled for July 15th, 2026. After that, additional hearings will be needed as the lawsuit itself still needs to be decided. Months, if not years, of continued legal battles are still ahead for both sides.
She's a master decorator in village scenes. That's her thing. She loved doing it.
And this is just like a quarter of what she would typically put out. When you think of Grammy, you think of holiday, you think of like beauty and making things.
You know, try to keep some of her tradition going, you know.
It's, hard to not see her Christmas tree here that she normally puts together. And I think the holidays with her were probably the best memories that I have.
Among the dead were Linda Basin and Dina Hillock. The mother and daughter duo loved the outdoors, and on that July 4th were camping at the HTR Texas Hill Country Campground in the city of Ingram, along the shores of the Guadalupe. Like many that night, they were sleeping when the river's waters suddenly began to rise. It wasn't until the sun came up that their family became aware of what happened.
I had taken my kids out back to school shopping, and I got a phone call from a friend of my mom's, and they were saying, "Hey, I've been trying to get a hold of your mom this morning and she's not answering. Have you talked to them?" And I said, No, but I'll call him. And I realized that I had had a voicemail come through my phone, but without a missed call. I knew immediately when I opened that voicemail that things were not okay. At 5:08, she had somehow gotten a call through to me that just said, "Heather, we're being washed away. Our cars, our RV, everything's being washed away. We're not gonna make it. I love you."
You can hear my mom in the background yelling, "Tell Bob I love him." And then you hear them screaming for help. And then the phone dies. You can hear it go underwater in it.
And we drove straight there, and then I didn't come home for a week.
We weren't leaving there until we knew they had been found. We wanted to at least bring their souls home. We were walking along the river, like we would start every morning from their campground, and we would push as far south as they would let us go. We watched them literally digging stuff up out of the river.
About a quarter of a mile down from where their campsite had been, there was, 3 or 4 cars maybe, and then my mom's completely just like wrapped. It was just excruciating, just waiting to hear something, to know something, to find something, to be told something.
On this particular day, when we're walking Courtney down and showing her for the first time, what's going on, there's these 2 redbirds that followed us from as soon as we got down into the campground area. And we walked probably a half mile, and at one point, Heather looks over and sees something that she thinks is an article of her mom's clothing just tied up in the brush on the side. And so we stopped there, and the redbird stopped with us. And they started talking to each other as if they were kind of laughing, like, "Look at these girls, we've got them out here in the outdoors," which they never like to do, and like they were laughing at us.
Like it just felt like them saying, "Hey, you have found us stuff, and we are here with you." And it was comforting as it can be in that moment to feel like they were with us.
Linda Basin was 78 years old. She spent over 4 decades working for an ophthalmology office in San Antonio, where she touched countless lives and was known for her kindness and generosity. While building a successful career, she raised a family and dedicated herself to her husband, Bob, who she affectionately called Sparky throughout their 33 years of marriage. She is remembered by her children as a gentle, strong, and nurturing mother. Dina Hillock was 57 years old. Dina was a single mother who raised her daughter with strength and ample love. Her family and friends remember her for her love of 80s rock music and her kindness. Taking shelter atop their vehicle, it was several days before their bodies were found.
Where my mom was actually found a mile down from the campsite. My sister got washed very far down. There's no closure to this. I know it's funny, you hear people say, well, you've had the funeral, at least you have your closure now. It's hard to reconcile why something like this had to happen.
It shouldn't have happened.
The campground should have had procedures, they should have had protocols. They had nothing. They own quite a few different properties throughout the U.S., and they have protocols in other properties. They should still be here. Again, it crushes me that the thing they love so much is what took them.
I miss them. I miss them every day.
And there's a lot that I wish that I had a chance to say to my mom and my grandma. So take the opportunities while you can.
Michael Phillips was the volunteer fire chief in Marble Falls, Texas, a city in Burnett County to the northwest of Austin. A devoted husband and father, he was known as Super Pops by his grandchildren. He insisted on continuing to work unpaid at the Marble Falls Fire Department, even after the department began paying salaries. When he wasn't working for the department, he was working for the Marble Falls School District, where he served as maintenance director, or training young firefighters throughout the state. He disappeared on July 5th, while responding to an emergency call as waters rose on the Cow Creek. His Jeep was found downstream. Searchers were able to find his pants, his shirt, his boots, his helmet, his glasses, his watch, and his wallet. But his body has never been recovered. Jane Ragsdale was the director of Heart of the Hills Camp for Girls. Ragsdale grew up attending summer camps in the Hill Country, including Camp Mystic, where her love for camp first began. After graduating from college, she became a journalist, traveling to Guatemala, where she worked as a war correspondent, and Argentina, where she wrote articles for the New York Times. She spent her summers in the Hill Country, though, running Heart of the Hills, which her parents, who operated Stewart Camp for Boys nearby, had purchased for her. There, she shaped the lives of thousands of campers and counselors, who she touched with her smile, dedication, and love for humankind. On the morning of July 4th, Jane called her brother Jeeper, who ran Camp Stewart, telling him that the water had reached the base of her bed. Jeeper credits her with saving the lives of several others at Camp Stewart, as her call allowed him to warn employees who were at the camp. Jane was killed by the floodwaters later that night, her body later being discovered further down the Guadalupe. She was 68 years old. Heart of the Hills and Camp Stewart, which are both located a few miles north of Camp Mystic, were not in session at the time the flood struck, and therefore had no campers present. The girls at Camp Mystic also deserve to be remembered. Every one of them deserves to have their stories told, though in-depth information is not readily available online for each girl. The following are stories about just a few of them, though this video is dedicated to the memory of all 27. Eloise Peck and Lila Bonner were best friends. They had just finished 2nd grade together. They were cabin mates in Bubble Inn, where they lit up the room with their smiles, laughter, and companionship. Eloise, known as Lulu by friends and family, was known to relish the world of wonder around her with a spirit of curiosity that motivated her to meet, pet, pick up, and bestow a name on every animal that crossed her path. She loved spaghetti, but not as much as she loved puppies. A massive Swiftie, she often wore Taylor for President shirts around her neighborhood. Lila Bonner was also a Swiftie. Her family remembers her as the kindest, most gentle soul, someone who found making friends easy. She dreamt of one day becoming a veterinarian, often spending long hours watching Animal Rescue and Animal ER on television. She was a natural soccer talent, finding her calling as a goalie in the local soccer league. When she wasn't busy defending the net, she often danced and played piano. The fact they died side by side gives a little solace to their parents. At least they had each other. Hannah and Rebecca Lawrence were twins. Hannah often told family and friends about Hannah World, an alternate universe in her head that was filled with candy and fun and really anything a kid would want. She was known to give her parents headaches by drawing purple H's on seemingly every piece of furniture in the house. She loved cakes and cookies and made friends everywhere she went, from school to camp to airplanes. Rebecca was a fashionista, always putting on her best outfits. She was strong and feisty, and very independent. She loved to read and play silly games on her iPad, and longed for the day when she would be old enough to dye her hair. Seal Stewart has, in many ways, become the face of the Heavens 27. Though her name has been mentioned many times in this video and has commonly been brought up in the contentious legal battles that are still raging, often overlooked is the story of who she was, as a girl and burgeoning young woman. She would have turned 9 on January 24th, 2026. Instead of watching her blow out birthday candles, her friends and family gathered for a heavenly birthday, to remember the fantastic person she was only just becoming. Listen to her mother describe her.
These days, I find myself considering Seal's legacy, how she'll be remembered. It is not what I imagined for her, and certainly not what she imagined for herself. But I cannot bear the idea of Seal remaining known as Seal Stewart, age 8, unaccounted for, the only Mystic camper who is yet to be recovered. I haven't shared much publicly about Seal, who she was, what she loved, and who she wanted to be. I've been consumed with her recovery and fighting for accountability for what happened to her, not with telling the world about her. And frankly, I cherish every memory of her life and want to keep it close to my heart. But Seal's legacy is not a statistic. It is not a weather event. It is a parent's worst nightmare, but she was my daughter. And her absence is like the sky spread over everything. Seal would never want our pain to be the only thing that survived her. She was extraordinary. She was loved, and she was stolen from us. A hummingbird's heart beats 1,000 times a minute, its wings flapping so fast that they hum and vibrate. Seal moved through the world like a hummingbird, quick and bright and nimble, always in motion and hard to pin down even when she was standing right in front of you. Like my daughter, a hummingbird's life is often tragically short, but both burn bright while they're here. Full speed, full color, and far too brief. She was brave in the loud way that little girls are brave when they think nothing in the world can hurt them, because the adults who love them have promised them that nothing will. She was my twin, and not in the way that mothers sometimes mean. Something intrinsic in her was wired the same way in me. The same temperament, the same humor, the same lovable defiance. She felt things at high volume. She loved with the same ferocity. I recognized her the way you recognize your own reflection. My family and childhood friends delighted in hearing my parenting stories about Seal and how hard it was to parent myself. I will spend the rest of my life walking past mirrors and seeing the woman she should have been. And what was taken from us at Camp Mystic wasn't only her body, it was all of that motion, all the places she was still going to go, the whole long life she was owed. She was music, laughter, and play in our lives. That's what's missing from our home now. And the shape of that silence is agonizing. Neither a storm nor a river took her from us. The Eastland's complacency, hubris, and choices took her from her family, from her life, and from her future. You have to look at what happened and decide whether it counts. We can never give meaning to what happened, but we can all work together to give it purpose, to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
The pain of loss never really goes away. For the families of those lost that day at Camp Mystic, and for those who know the hundreds of people across the hill country who lost their lives in that weekend's floods, an irreplaceable hole now exists where the joy, happiness, and glow of a loved one once stood. Portions of the disaster area have rebuilt. Many summer camps have begun to reopen. But for those families, there will never be true recovery. All we can do now is ensure that those lost are remembered, that the lives they lived are not reduced to mere statistics, but seen as the humans they were, and work towards making sure that a disaster like this will never happen again. There are no proper words to end a video like this. So, instead we'll leave you with a song, written by Virginia Hollis, an 8-year-old victim of the floods who was staying at Camp Mystic. She called it Virginia's Song.
Thank you.